Think for yourself. Question authority.
Rabbi Weiss, welcome. How
Thank
are you
you.
today?
So, with the help of the Almighty, I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message, and so sanctify His name, and shall bring peace to the world. As I mentioned, my name is Rabbi Yisrael David Weiss. I spokesperson for Neturei Karta, that's protectors of the city. Basically, we are the voice of Jews who are true to our religion, Judaism, and we try to educate and clarify the view of Judaism in regard to the state of Israel, which they like to refer to themselves as a Jewish state, as if this is part of the Jewish religion. So basically what we do is try to clarify that there's a group of people, a nationalist group, that are simply trying to transform our religion to nationalism. They're trying to fuse, to conflate their nationalist agenda together with a religion, and that is totally bogus. It's criminal, and that's our mission with God's help. So I do with that, and therefore we will explain that with God's help. I'll try to explain, what Judaism is, and therefore we will understand with God's help how Judaism and versus Zionism. Zionism is a transformation out of the religion into a totally ersatz Judaism, a different type of thing, entirely a nationalist, a material type of concept. While Judaism is a religion, and let me explain, with God's help. Judaism is a covenant that the Jewish people, the people of the children, the offsprings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Jacob's children, the 12 tribes, they were enslaved in Egypt for 210 years. They were supposed to be there 400 years, but they were severely enslaved, so God shortened the time that they were there. And then the Almighty took us out of Egypt through miracles, the 10 plagues that was done openly to the Pharaoh and the Egyptians, because the Pharaoh refused. God sent Moses and his brother Aaron, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, to tell him that he should send the Jewish people out. He had enslaved them for 210 years. Now he refused to, and it seems that the Egyptians, they had powerful, like borders. They had like with how would you call it? Kishuf, we call it. The kishuf means like a type of magic in a certain manner, that they were able to like lock the borders. You couldn't leave; it wasn't possible to leave, and they kept the Jews enslaved. And he refused to let them out, as God told Moshe Rabbeinu that He's not going to allow them to go out, and till He went through the process of 10 plagues. Each one in of itself was a miraculous happening. Pharaoh tried to do with his, what they call chartumim, with his magic makers, and they could not do these 10 plagues. It was they couldn't do this. Some of them they couldn't do it. So they saw it's not a power of a human power anyway. It was a godliness, and all the Jews saw this. And the Mitzrim saw them. Eventually, the last one was that there was one before the last lesson, for instance, that there was like a darkness, but a darkness that was palpable. You could not move. And then there came the firstborn of every Egyptian family was smitten. And Pharaoh was the firstborn, but God left him over, and he still refused to let the Jews out. Eventually, he let them out. He told them to go after the 10 plagues. By the 10th one, when he was afraid he's going to be smitten because he was the firstborn, and so they allowed the Jews out. And the Jews went to the Am. They changed their mind. and they came running after them, and God made the Egyptians came after them with Pharaoh in the front, came running after the Jews. God made a miracle, and the Yams of the Red Sea split. Now it split in the world that we believe in, like in 12 sections for the 12 tribes anyway, and the Egyptians came afterwards, after them, trying to kill them, and the sea swallowed them. The Red Sea, it came back down. Like when the Jews went through, it was like walls, and they were able to go through. And the Egyptians came, and it swallowed them. Basically, they drowned in the water. And all the Jewish people saw this. We're talking around 1 million people. Let's just say there were 600,000 males from the age of 20 to 60, and then there were the rest of the families. And then they went. God told they went from there to Sinai, Midbar, and there they went and they accepted the Torah from God on the Mount Sinai, and they saw how God was speaking to them. They actually heard God speaking to them, although we don't understand. God doesn't have a shape or form, and they heard God speaking to them. And so we're talking about that. This is a religion that wasn't refuted by any of these million people, and we're people of the book. It was passed down from generation to generation without any gap. So it's a very, very truthful. I think it wasn't refuted by anybody. And this all these miracles, that the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, the actually God speaking to them. When God spoke to them, they accepted. All the Jews together accepted to the covenant of Judaism. So that is basically our religion. It's been passed down from generation to generation since then, and our religion entails 613 commandments. There's the 10 commandments in the tablets, but there are 613 commandments in the Torah. So basically, we have to adhere to the Torah. We're not allowed to digress. We're not allowed to in any way change or even one letter of the Holy Torah. This is our belief, which is from God. So just like God is above the concept of time and form and shape, and the Torah is like a blueprint that was given by God. So it's something it's above the concept of time. Time may change, but that we never say, like there's other movements that call themselves forms of Judaism that say, oh, the time has changed, so therefore we have to conform to the time. No, we have to conform ourselves to the Torah, because God gave us as like a blueprint that as it has any time, it's as if it was given this minute, this moment from God. And so our lives have to conform to the Torah. And that is what means Orthodox Jewry was accepted, because there was something called Reform Judaism around 300 years ago, which was the concept of 300, whatever that area, that there was maybe 250 years ago. In that area at the time, there was a movement that they're going to reform, they're going to change the Judaism. Now, if somebody understands it's from God, it's just ridiculous even to think of such a thing, because what do you mean you're going to change? There's the Almighty. The whole world is being controlled by the Almighty, and we believe everything to the minutest, and everything is totally under the control of the Almighty. God, again, is awesome, above time, above space, above everything. He can't be quantified in space or time, and everything that is happening to the billions of DNA and genes and whatever, everything they're discovering, how awesome and how unbelievable how the body works, and everything, that it just works like it's beyond comprehension. They still can't. In fact, doctors are constantly struggling and discovering, and things have different types of medication, everything. How? Because they discovered that the new way that they understand the body, the intricacies of the body, and this is working like clockwork. When it works, everything is working. It's like clockwork, and they're trying. And so there's an awesome, the Almighty. We believe in Judaism. We believe that the Almighty controls everything from small to big. There's no difference. It's all under the control of the Almighty. And Jewish people, we had this covenant that we made with God, that we said, Nasa v'nishma, on Mount Sinai, 3,000 years ago, that we will we accept that the Almighty is the ruler of the world, and we will do whatever He says. And then we no matter, we don't make any conditions. Nasa, we will do Vinish Me'efs, we're ready to hear whatever the Almighty says. In other words, we accept it without any conditions, preconditions. And we're not allowed to change, as I say, even one. It says even King Solomon, who was blessed from God with special wisdom, he understood the language of animals, whatever, many different things. And even he, like our rabbis tell us, if he would want to change because of, according to his wisdom, his logic, he would say, "Oh, I would like to change something." We would not accept it, and nothing. There's no such thing that even Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, or King Saul, whoever it may be, would want to do anything, change it. No, the Torah is a given by God, and we have to adhere to it. Right. So, but times change.
Just to clarify for us, because a lot of people see your pro-Palestinian marches, and they think that there's a sort of anomalous group within the community that believe this, and then everyone else disagrees with you. But it seems that what you're implying is that if you adhere to the book, it is the correct way. You guys are not just this anomaly where you're unique. Like in the Talmud, which is another holy book within your religion, there are these 3 oaths. And the first oath, and this is in Ketubot, I can't pronounce it correctly, sorry. Jews from mass immigrating to the land of Israel is the number 1 oath to prohibit. And then the second oath is Jews cannot rebel against the nations of the world. And then the third is the nations are prohibited from oppressing the Jewish people excessively. And so I've heard some people argue that because that third oath had been, because the nations had oppressed the Jewish people, then because that third oath was broken, that might give you guys the ability to go against the first oath, which is prohibiting the Jews from mass immigrating to Israel. How do you feel about that controversy of because
that is totally false. But let me just, again, I'll give me just a few moments. I was coming to Zionism, I wanted to explain. So we have basically a Judaism, I was saying, no matter who, no matter what, you can't change. It's a godliness. Reform, our covenant that we made with God, it's a godly given thing. It's our bond with God, who's above time and everything. He's the ruler of the world. And we have this, we accepted this covenant to be subservient to God, to uphold all the commandments. Reform came like 250 years ago, around a little more, between 250 and 300, whatever, and they decided that they're going to reform Judaism, which is ridiculous because it's not a religion you can't change. It's not a religion made by man, and it's a covenant that we made with the Almighty, it's His world, just like whatever He made the person. You can't. This is and He gave the set of rules for this person to be. You can't come along and say, "I'm going to make another set of rules." If they do it, so they're following another religion. Basically, they can't call it Judaism. So, but now their concept was to assimilate this reform Judaism. They're going to reform, and they wanted to assimilate into society in Europe. And so therefore they stopped keeping, let's say, the Sabbath. The Sabbath is from the 10 Commandments to show that we believe God created the world 6 days. The 7th He rested. Rested is not a concept of God working or resting, but basically 6 days He created the world to show our belief that in 6 days He created the world, and the 7th He rested, whatever that means. Therefore, we're not allowed to work on the Sabbath. Reform, they have no problem, no compunctions, no problem. Everything goes on the Sabbath like it wasn't done. So it's ridiculous. But I'm just trying to say it's not Judaism. Now, most of the Zionist movement were children and grandchildren from these. They were people who came from Jewish heritage, but they totally were not following the laws of the Torah, and they weren't observant. But they came along and they decided they're going to change they decided for convenience sake, the reform movement said we're going to change because they want to assimilate. So they're going to stop having beards. They're going to not dress like a Jew. They're going to mingle with the non-Jewish people and eat the non-kosher food and whatever they decide to do, whatever's convenient. But but there was still anti-Semitism in Europe from the time of the beginning of reform for another 100 years or whatever. So the Zionists who came like 100 years later said, hey, this is not working for us. We're going to, that was one of the reasons they came along with their logic of what they said. So we're going to make our own national home. That was what Zionism, Zion means the city of Jerusalem, means, yes, the city of David, the city of Jerusalem. So they decided we're going to make a national home. Well, how could you do that? Why can't you do it? Because I'm going to get to the three O's, what you just mentioned. But basically they said, no, you know what? This is not working assimilation. What we're going to do is make our own country. So both this reform movement and the offspring of reform movement, which was Zionism, which was, in other words, that you ignore and the words of God of the Torah, because both of these are a rebellion against God and unacceptable. I just want to explain that, ironically, reform was very strongly opposed to Zionism because they wanted to assimilate, that you shouldn't stick out, that Jews shouldn't be so visible. So they didn't like Zionism at the beginning, but being that they did whatever's practical, they eventually came over to Zionism to join Zionism. But basically, Zionism was a movement that rebelled against the Jewish religion, and they were against the reform in the fact that they wanted to make their own society and not assimilate. That's what their concept was. Now, Zionism came along and they said, we're going to make our own state. Now, as you correctly mentioned in the Gemara, in the Talmud Ksubos, now let me just explain. The Torah, there's one Torah. There's no two Torahs by Jewish people. There's one Judaism, and that is what we call Orthodox. And if it wouldn't be blemished by Zionism, we would proudly say Orthodox Jewry. But unfortunately, I have to, with God's help, explain a little further. Because, a little later, I'll explain that.
And let me apologize, because that's why I struggled with my description, is because I'm trying to show that there are varying degrees of adherence. Right, but I understand there's not different forms. It's varying degrees of adherence.
In Europe, when they made the reform, at that time they called Orthodox. There was the status quo. There was the movement of reform. Then there was the status quo that they're going to allow the reforms to be amongst the Jewish populace. And then there was the Orthodox. That was like, it's German or something. Orthodox means that the Orthodox are not going to change one iota from Judaism. They totally cut off from the reform. They're not going to be status quo either. They're going to be totally Orthodox. So Orthodox was something we were proud of, the word Orthodox, because it meant that you were not meddling at all with the Holy Torah. Zionism came along. And now Zionism was really a very anti-religious movement, because it was trying to transform Judaism into nationalism. But they tried to, in order to get legitimacy, they tried to incorporate the religion, saying, oh, this is something godly. In other words, they wanted to make their homeland, Zionism wanted to make their own homeland in any place that would be convenient for them. So they were thinking of Uganda, Patagonia, next to Argentina. But then they decided Palestine would be the most convenient, because they'll be able to sell it to the world as, oh, it's godliness, and you need a massive amount of support in order to create a national home. Because you need a lot of money and support. So in order to get the support, they decided they'll go to Palestine, and then they'll tell the world, hey, look, it's the part of the Jewish belief, the Judaism, that Christianity and Muslim Islam is based a lot on the Torah, and so they'll be able to tell them, you should be supporting us, because we're simply part of the Torah that was till now part of the children of Israel, that God gave us the land, the Holy Land, which is Palestine. God gave it to us, so you should be supporting us. And they understood they'll be able to get this massive support. Now, they had a problem, because of what it says in the Talmud. It's not only the Talmud. Now, what Judaism is, as I was explaining, is one concept. There's no different parts of Judaism. Judaism was this covenant that we made with God, the 613 commandments, that is in the 5 books of Moses, that was given to Moses when he came down from Mount Sinai. As I say, this was witnessed by all the Jewish people, over 1 million people. But in the Torah, these commandments are written very concisely. So the details of all the laws was given over orally to Moses, to Moshe Rabbeinu. Later, he saw through the generations, they saw that they're forgetting the words, all the details. So it was written down in the form of Mishnah, then later in the form of Talmud. So the Talmud is basically the explanation and part of Judaism. It's the 5 books of Moses and the books of the prophets will be called the written law, and the oral law is the Talmud. So it maybe gets a bad rap. We can get into that later, but in fact, anybody who's religious, there's no such thing. A Jew, if he's a religious Jew, and you ask him, do you hold of the Talmud or something? Of course he does. It's part of the Torah. If he says that he doesn't follow the Talmud, we consider him a heretic. He's not following Judaism. He's bogus. He's nothing. He's a fraud. There's no such thing. It's part of the Torah that God gave us. So we follow the Talmud. Now, the Talmud that you mentioned, the 3 oaths, I'll explain. The Talmud is explaining the 3 oaths that was given in a prophecy to King Solomon. When the Jews went into the Holy Land, as by God's command, they were to build a temple. King David was supposed to build a temple, but his son actually built it, King Solomon. And King Solomon built the temple, and he himself wrote a book of prophecy called Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, where in there he said to the Jews, and I'm not going to get into the exact details, but it said there was like 3 verses that were referring to the 3 oaths that God said to the daughters of Jerusalem. It's the first one of the 3 is the 2nd chapter, 7th verse, where it says, God said to the daughters of Jerusalem, I'm putting you under no oath. Do not awaken my love prematurely. As everything is written in metaphor, most is written in metaphor and parables. So the rabbis explain in the Talmud that God is saying to the Jewish children, when you will be sent into exile, you will be driven from the land, from the holy temple, when the holy temple will be destroyed as it was by the Romans and the Greeks eventually. So they'll be sent into exile. Then you should not attempt to reestablish a Jewish sovereignty. So in 3 manners: do not try to return en masse, as you mentioned. Do not rebel against any nation, and the third one is a little different than you said. The third was, do not make any attempt to end exile in any shape or form. It says, do not return en masse, do not rebel against nations, do not attempt to end exile in any shape or form. Now, there is another 3 oaths, is the oaths that the other nations of the world will put on the oath by God, that they should not oppress the Jews with excessive force. In other words, that it's enough that they're sent into exile. Do not oppress them. So there came some people. Now the Zionists came. So that's basically the oath. So therefore, This happened like 2,000 years, the destruction of the temple, and we are forbidden to make any attempt to return. So now we are forbidden to return en masse or to attempt to end exile, meaning that even if the nations of the world would give us a piece of land or give back Palestine to us and say, here, take it, it's yours, and it would be uninhabited, we would refuse to breach these oaths of God, because it's a godly decreed oath. We believe it's given by God as a medicine. Just like you take medicine, it may be bitter. Our being dispersed amongst the nations is that we should become humbled. We believe that God gives us to humble as a medication, and that we should better ourselves and be closer to God. And if God, with his compassion, because God is totally compassionate, when the time comes that he feels that we are worthy and the time is right for us to return, in the blink of an eye, God will end the exile. And we believe at that time there will be a metaphysical change in the world, where all humanity will recognize there is one God, and we will all the whole world will serve him in harmony. They will stop being atheists and things like that. Now, till that day comes, we are under oath, as I say, not to return. Now, the Zionists were people who ridiculed Judaism. Some of them didn't believe entirely in God. Some of them simply were like the Reform, that they didn't accept the commandments. But let's just say they believed in God, whatever it may be. But they totally didn't accept Judaism, which is that we're expressly forbidden to try to end exile. Zionism is rooted in blasphemy, because they'll turn to a religious Jew almost entirely. You'll find the Zionists, when you meet them, you'll start speaking to them. They'll say, "Oh, where was God to protect us in these 2,000 years of our exilic existence?" So they'll come, and in one side of the mouth, even if they'll say they believe in God. Now, if you believe in God, you believe God is awesome. Or the whole world runs constantly. Your life, you don't implode, you don't disappear because there's a God. So all of a sudden they say God is weak. Where was God to protect us? It's ridiculous. It's full of contradictions. But we believe God is does all the power is in him, and if he wants it to end in 1 second, he can end the exile. But he doesn't want, and he's told us that there's no way you're not going to be able to protect yourself by creating a state. That's not your solution. The solution is for protection in this exile is by being subservient to God, following His commandments, and that's what it says. You should do the words of God, and God will protect you. So we believe our remedy, our medicine, our solution is simply only by being truthful, truth to God, true to His commandments. And if we will, God forbid, disobey Him, it'll bring catastrophic results. And that's in the oaths of God. It says, why are you rebelling against me? It says in the oaths of God, I put you on the oath, daughters of Jerusalem, as I mentioned before. I put you on the oath, daughters of Jerusalem, with the deer and the buck of the field. I put you on the oath, the daughters of the Jerusalem. If you will try to awaken my love prematurely. So that this says 3 times that we're not allowed to breach these oaths, and do not try to leave exile prematurely. If you will attempt to leave exile prematurely, it says, I put you under the oath, daughters of Jerusalem, with the buck and the deer of the field. So that our rabbis tell us in the Talmud that you mentioned, this Ksubos, page 111, that God is telling, what does it say with the deer? I put you on the oath with the deer and the buck of the field, that if God forbid we will breach these oaths, then we will be hunted like animals, like the deer in the buck of the field. So when the Zionists come along and they say, "Oh, we're going to end exile. We're now the beginning," what they call themselves, "Eschalta de Geula," beginning of redemption. With the beginning of God's redemption, the miracle that we're praying for 2,000 years, and they're going to return. What they're doing is incurring the wrath of God on us. God forbid that, just like it happened by Hitler, that we were made into the lamps, we were in lampshades and into bars of soap. If you know, unfortunately, that Hitler, they actually melted down the Jews. I mean, it's beyond comprehension, into bars of soap. It's a fact. And so we were hunted like animals. And our rabbis warned us, if you will attempt to leave exile, this will be the punishment. So our rabbis, many rabbis who were being led to the gas chambers, by the way, my grandparents were led to the gas chamber and were gassed. They were in Auschwitz, my father's parents. And as the majority of Jews, there were 6 million Jews in Europe or more that were murdered by the Nazis. They were hunted like the Nazis. Now, it happens to be that this is like 50 years after the advent of Zionism, this movement of people who said we're going to leave exile. And there were rabbis who were being led to the gas chambers. There's witnesses to it. They said it's because we did not stand up and fight Zionism enough that this punishment is coming upon us. Now, let us understand that does not in any manner release the Nazis from the punishment that God will punish them because of what they did. In other words, it's like a drunk. Somebody gets drunk and he mows into a group of people and he kills them. So we believe, as a Jewish person, that the people that died, every single one of them, the one that was decreed to live, lived. The one who was decreed to die, because of whatever reason, they died when this drunkard went into them. But the drunkard will obviously be responsible, will be punished for what he did. That's the same thing. The Nazis, of course, are evil. They're going to be punished. But at the same time, there's a reason. Nothing happens happenstance, or it just happened. You know, we were punished with the Holocaust, there's reasons for it. And one of the reasons is it could be our rabbis speak about that we could incur the wrath of God because they tried to leave exile, what the Zionists tried to do. It's a very controversial what I'm saying, and very sensitive. I can just add another thing, by the way. The Reform movement started in Austria, in Germany, and they came along and they wanted to assimilate. They said, we're going to assimilate and we're going to be respected amongst the nations. So they started to drop the Torah and not observe the Torah, and they started dressing as a non-Jew. They cut their beards, they stopped wearing Jewish garb, and said, "Oh, we'll assimilate, and that's going to bring us peace and respect." And where did Hitler come from? From Austria, where the elite, the high society of Germany, that's where Hitler came from. And he said, your grandfather was a Jew, into the gas chambers. He didn't look at that they if they assimilate, that's going to protect them. Maybe it's just, I'm not prophet, and we're not,
Yeah.
we could, but if you would like to think into what we're supposed to be introspective and always try to understand why things happen. So, I mean, God is perfect, and he does things, we try to understand what God wants to teach us. We had that the Hitler came and the millions of Jews, it started in Europe, and the largest concentration of Jews that were murdered were in Austria, and then in Russia, and then in Hungary, which was the last year that the Nazis came into in 44 and 45. The year 1944, 1945, when there was the most religious community, and they were the least. Many were murdered. 600, 700,000, whatever the populace was there, but they were the most that remained afterwards. Hitler was from that community. It's a whole complicated thing, but
Right.
I'm trying to say.
Before we get to the next part, I do want to reflect on some of the things you said. Before I speak, you're speaking in full regalia with all the accoutrements. You are a true Jewish man, so you're allowed to speak about these things with a little bit more license. Before I go into this topic, I just want to preface, especially there was a man recently arrested and extradited from the state of New York to Germany. He's now in prison for discussing on a podcast the horrors of the atrocities you just mentioned. And so I am not going to freely speak. I'm going to be very careful. It is actually, even in America, illegal to question this narrative whatsoever. This guy wasn't even a denier. He was someone that was sort of questioning the numbers, questioning this. And so I'm going to be very careful. But there was something you might have heard, the Havara Agreement. It's mentioned in a book called Zionism During the Holocaust by Greenstein. Basically, there was an agreement between the Germany and the Zionist organizations in 1933. They had basically agreed for 60,000 German Jews to migrate to Palestine. This is far before the Holocaust. And so there is this theory. It's not my theory. Please don't bring me to German prison for saying this. I just want to get this truth out here so we can discuss it. But there is a theory that there was actually a motivation to have the anti-Semitism inspire everyone to migrate to Palestine, because these people wanted there to be a majority and a mass migration, especially with these religious parameters. They wanted to get around that. So there's a theory, not my theory, that there actually was an incentive to have this European anti-Semitism, because what's going to get someone who lives in Austria to want to move to the desert? Very few people want to abandon their comforts in Europe and all of a sudden move to what was then just regular Palestine. And so there is this elaborate theory that it's actually they were together. There's even a coin where the Star of David is on one side and on the other side is the swastika. And some people see it. There was a betrayal from these secular and less strict Jewish people that wanted Israel to be filled with Jewish people that were from Europe. And have you heard of this agreement?
I'm trying to. I'm see if I have here. I have a book, The Holocaust Victims Accused. Unfortunately, I don't have it right here by my hand, but there's a book called Holocaust Victims Accused. We do know that when they closed down Jewish newspapers and so forth, the Nazis actually colluded with the Zionists, because, again, like you say, the Zionists were interested in having Jews go up to Palestine, and in order to build up their community, and the Nazis were very happy to have that, because they worked together at the beginning. Later, of course, then that changed. Now, and again, we have a book called The Holocaust Victims Accused, where we have a lot of documents. We can show what the Nazis, how the Zionists colluded with them. I have And again, unfortunately, I did not bring it with me. We have historical.
It's okay. You can give me a
documents.
link, and I can post a link
Right.
if you need to reference. You can just
Yes,
reference it casual
as
now.
another book called Historical Documents that I put out under my name, Rabbi Yisrael David Weiss, Historical Documents, and where we write and show how the Zionists they refused to save to stand together with the Jewish people actually to give money from the coffers of the Zionists in order to save the Jews during the Holocaust, and they and over there it's quoted. Possibly I'm going to have it in front of you now, historical documents. With a few minutes, I'm just going to ask my friend to bring it here. And basically, I'm going to leave that part because I want to get to the part. There was the Jewish National Fund, JNF, Jewish National Fund. They were asked if they would give money from the coffers to save Jews. Yeah, my friend, do you have the book Historical Documents here? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm asking my friend for that book, Historical Documents.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah.
Anyway, but the head of JNF, Greenfeld, so he said that if we refuse to give any money from the coffers of the Zionists in order to save Jews while they were being murdered, he said, because we don't. That's putting the issue of the Zionists' agenda to a secondary status. So they refuse to give any money for this. And we have their quotes, and which I'm going to show to you in a few minutes with God's help. The same thing was the first president of the state of Israel, Chaim Weizmann, and I'm quoting him. He also said there, he said, the millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history. Okay, you got it there? Page. Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, who was the one who was pivotal in the creation of the state, because he was a scientist in Britain and he discovered some type of gunpowder or something, and he did a tremendous deed for the Britain, and they wanted to repay him afterwards, and they said, how can we repay you? So he said he wanted that they should help him create the Zionist state of Israel. That's how the Balfour Declaration came about, where they promised them a state. Now, he was asked about, he wrote, and he had at a meeting, and we have it quoted, where he said the millions during, like the beginning of the killing of Jews by the Nazis, so they saw how Jews are being, it was written, the handwriting was on the wall that Jews are being killed in 1939 or so, and they saw Jews are being killed, and he said, you got it? No, the
Holocaust?
Yeah, bringing the Holocaust. So he said that, I'm going to try to quote him verbatim until he mix up but he says there, you got it? Okay. Here, Dr. Chaim Weizmann. I don't have the book here, so he's you can open it. It says, who's the first president of the state of Israel. And I'm quoting him. Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. We want only the best of Jewish youth to come to us. We want only the educated to enter Palestine for the purpose of increasing its culture. Educated being scientists, lawyers, because he was from this reform type of a Jew. The other Jews will have to face whatever fate. The other Jews will have to stay where they are and face whatever fate awaits them. In other words, the Jews of Europe will have to face whatever fate awaits them. These millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown away. The other Jews, in other words, in Europe, who are not part of this movement, will have are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown. These millions of Jews, again, can I say? 1 second. It's page 116 of the book Historical Documents that we put out. Again, let me finish it. These millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown away. We don't want them pouring into Palestine. We don't want Tel Aviv to become another low-grade ghetto. Imagine, millions of Jews should be blown away. We're talking about the Jew. This is unbelievable. Now the head of the refuge, Yitzchak Grunbaum, the chairperson of the Jewish Agency Rescue Fund, that's from the JNF. So he said, when they asked me, couldn't you give money out of the UJA, United Jewish Appeals Funds, for the rescue of Jews in Europe? I said no. And I say again, no. One should resist this wave which pushes the Zionist activities to secondary to secondary importance. Let them say that I am anti-Semitic. Let them say what they want. I will not demand that the Jewish Agency allocates a sum of 300,000 or 100,000 pounds sterling to help European Jewry. I think that whoever demands such a thing is performing an anti-Zionist act. I'm just giving you an idea who we're dealing with. So basically, again, the Zionists, and I'll show you a picture that you should just get an idea. We're not talking about Zionists here. This is Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister. There was a president, Chaim Weizmann, who I talked about.
And that's the Zionist Congress meeting?
Of this pivotal moment was... Here you're seeing David Ben-Gurion reading the Declaration of Independence. It's the most historical moment. They're reading the Declaration of Independence in 1948 in Independence Hall. That's the day. That's when they made the State of Israel. And here you have a picture of Theodor Herzl at the top here. On the wall, you see the Stars of David, a picture of Theodor Herzl, who was dead by that time. And you see here you see David Ben-Gurion and the dais. Now look at the dais with the rabbis, people, Jewish religious Jews cover their heads, dressed like Jews. Here you see the ones who are making the so-called Jewish state. You only see one of them. They're not covering their heads. If they are, you don't see barely, if it's possible. But you see the entire group. You don't see them covering their heads. Of course, they don't have beards or anything. They're making a Jewish state. Imagine making a Christian state without priests, or making a Muslim state without imams or ayatollahs or sheikhs. It's unbelievable. This is the Jewish state that we're talking about. So let us understand this Zionist endeavor is a concept of a nationalism. Judaism is, as I explained at length, with God's help, is a religion subservience to the Almighty, upholding all the laws of the Torah. We're forbidden to stray, even one law not to obey, and we keep that. And when times change, so we conform in time. My meaning to say is, let's say you get new issues, electricity.
You have a computer, you have glasses.
So it says in the Torah, the Sabbath, you're not allowed to make fire on the Sabbath to show we rest on the seventh day, because God created the world 6 days, seventh he rest. So now when they made electric, the rabbis sat together around the world. They decided that electricity is, for many other reasons also, but that electricity you're not allowed to do on the Sabbath, because it's like fire. So in the religious communities, they won't you're not allowed to use a car, you're not allowed to anything combustible, anything electric, you're not allowed to open lights, and on and on and on. These laws of the Sabbath. Now, of course, the Reform has no respect for that. They do what they want. They don't keep the Sabbath. The Zionist state, which Reform was that going to assimilate, they wanted to change the religion. Zionism said, no, they're not going to change it that way. They're going to make their own homeland, even though that we're in exile, that we're forbidden to return en masse. But they don't care about the Jewish law. So the land by itself, the state of Israel, doesn't follow the laws of the Torah. The cars come and go, and everything goes on as if it would be a weekday, because it's not a Jewish state. It's a farce. It's a fraud. It's an ersatz Judaism. They try to reestablish a different type of a Judaism from religion, subservience to God, into nationalism. So it's totally fraud, and in its essence, it's a fraud. But you'll ask them, what about God says you're not? What about believing in God to protect us? They say, where was God to protect us all? And we have to have our state. So it's rooted in this belief that God has power, that God can control the world, that God is controlling the world, and they're disobeying the laws of the Torah. And in its essence, it's rooted in blasphemy and heresy, and in its actions, we are forbidden to leave exile. We are forbidden to return en masse. We are forbidden to rebel against the other nations. On top of that, besides all these issues, we are to show gratefulness to people who did us good. Now, if you look at the history, you will see that the nations, when we were being oppressed in Europe, and they tried, was the Crusades, the Inquisition, Jews were being murdered because they refused to convert to Christianity and so on. It was, the Jews were accepted and embraced in the Muslim lands. So we went there and we were able to flourish as religious Jewish people amongst religious Muslims, including in the Ottoman Empire, which was included Palestine. So Jews lived there together with the Muslims. As you can see, this is the way we used to live in all the Arab and Muslim lands. We lived together, Jews, distinctly Jewish amongst distinctly, Arab or Muslim people. So the difference of religion is not the issue. It was never an impediment to coexistence. On the contrary, we were able to live amongst the Muslims, maybe because they believe in one God also, and they accepted us. So we lived amongst these people. Now, Zionism betrays all of God's adherence, commands, and the prohibitions. So they made a concept of that we're going back there. We'll make our own state. Now they had a problem because they wanted to ensnare the religious Jews amongst them, the ones from the Orthodox communities. So they came along and said what you said way back in this interview, where you asked, what about that there's some people who say that there's a prohibition against nations, one of the oaths, that the nations should not oppress us unduly, and therefore, being that they breached this oath, therefore it nullifies the other oaths, and they were therefore able to go and return en masse. But that's a farce. That's just a Zionist propaganda. That's a Zionist ploy. In other words, they wanted to be able to ensnare Jews, because if you will, all the rabbinical authorities in Europe, every one of them, almost entirely, of course, you'll find, I could give you a handful who became Zionists, but we put out a book called The Rabbis Speak Out. It's a book, a compilation of all the major rabbis from all the European countries around the world, not all the European countries. From you have from Montevideo, from South America, from England, from Nitra, from Romania, from basically from every single, from all the countries, from Yemen, from Sephardic countries, all the Jewish leaders in all together stood in opposition to Zionism, and they said there are clearly. They are, as the picture shows you. If you would have studied these people, you would have, did a little homework in the issue. You would see the Zionists were not some religious holy people who came along and were worried and tried to figure out a way of serving God, and they came up with this issue. No, this was a movement of heretics who wanted a national home, they wanted a selfish interest. Yet, in order to be able to get following of the Christianity so they went and they picked Palestine.
I was just about to say that. I was. My next question was like, okay, a man with adherence to the scripture like you gets along with a Muslim, because you guys have a lot in common. You guys are both true monotheists. You're against idol worship. You actually are very copacetic together. But the Zionists, the secular Zionists and the modern Israeli Zionists, they get along. They are adapted to the Christian world. And a lot of people hear the word Zionist and they think political Jew. They just, it's a synonymous with Jew now. However, most Zionists are Christians. And a lot of people don't know that Christianity, which is obviously went astray, but it stems from the Abrahamic beliefs, and it has its own new revelations and changing of the Torah. It changes a few things of the Torah. I don't want people thinking the Old Testament is precisely like the Torah, but they're apocalyptic. They have a new apocalypse that actually requires the Jewish people to go back to Israel. They want, so the Christian prophecy, the reestablishment of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, that's the key sign to the end times. And then they want the temple rebuilt, and the Antichrist has to show up and desecrate the temple. So the Christians are accused sometimes of like my atheist speaker, the first guy I spoke to, he was talking about how the Christian apocalypse requires the Jewish people to be sort of harmed. It's actually, there's a bad intention behind Christian Zionism. You guys are actually sort of being given as almost as a sacrifice to fulfill the Christian end of times. And a lot of people don't realize that the Christian component of Zionism is gigantic in the cooperation that you're describing.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about that. So I mean, basically, that when I said in the 1890s they had a meeting in Basel in Switzerland, where again they were thinking about where they should create their national home. Again, we're talking about heretics. We're talking about people not religious. Ben Gurion, Chaim Weizmann, Jabotinsky. I mean, all these Theodor Herzl. These guys were anti-religious, anti-Jewish. But so in their what they wanted was a national home. They wanted to take God out of the equation. So they wanted a Jewish like a facade, and that they're going to the Jewish people. And it should be an ersatz, like I say, a transformation to a nationalist concept, totally void of godliness in its essence. So they were looking for a place convenient. Like I said, they wanted Patagonia, Uganda. They only picked even Rochester, New York was a thought, but what they were thinking of, they're going to the Holy Land because they're going to be able to take this concept, the story of the Bible, the children of Israel. That's the basis of which Christianity is built on, and they'll be able to tell them, hey, these are the children of Israel, have to go back to the land of Israel. Now, these, like you was mentioning, the evangelistic Christians, they have this belief of Armageddon, that there's going to be the end of time, that the Jews and the Muslims are going to go up and they're either going to convert to Christianity or they're going to kill them, have a war and kill themselves. So it's very controversial. Their support for the state of Israel, for the growth of the state of Israel, is to get the Jews to go up there. That it's going to bring the end of time. Now, not all the Christians, and a lot of Christians who support the state of Israel, it's not because of their evil inclination, whatever.
Right.
It's because they have compassion. They saw the Jews, how much they suffered by the Holocaust, where the world was silent when Jews were being murdered for 6 years in a row, and nobody stopped it, and they refused the Jews entry into other lands. So there's a guilt feeling in the world, and there's people who sympathize with the Jews who suffered so much, so they want to support them to have a state. Now, we're very thankful for the people who want to help us. I mean, if they mean well, fine, terrific, but they're unfortunately being duped and misled, because this by supporting this Zionist endeavor, this creation of the state of Israel, they're supporting not the Jewish people, they're supporting a selfish, flawed group of people that is totally against the Jewish religion and hurting both the Jewish, the people who are adhering to the Jewish religion, because it's like I would do something against Christian people, and because according to my understanding, Christianity should be a certain way or something. You would say, hey, excuse me, what are you meddling into the other religion's business? The same thing here. The Jewish people who we went through so much, like I say, my grandparents and the majority of both my father's and mother's family were murdered by the Nazis. My mother's, mostly of blessed memory, her family was from Poland. My father's family was Hungarian. They were all murdered, the vast majority of them. Now, and so we have a remnant of Jewish people who remained. And our Torah, our belief in God, our religion is that we say every single day, every Jewish person says, Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, God is our God, God is one. And we teach our children that they have to be ready to die for God and to uphold our religion. So this is our religion. So now a group comes and they want to take our religion and rip it out and make it into a nationalist, to take a piece of land. And our rabbis are screaming and yelling, as let's say, I'll quote just one of the rabbis in this book from Radin, from Lithuania. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen, who everybody in the Jewish world who observant Jew will tell you he's one of the greatest leaders. He was the codifier of Jewish law, and everybody follows and respects his teaching. He puts out a lot of law books that we follow, and he wrote, and this is him quoted, that was from his student. He put out the book called Omer Ani Maser Melech, and he writes, the Zionists are dead limbs of our people, which causes the entire body to rot. He's like a tree, has dead limbs, and if you leave it on the tree, it's going to. So he said the Zionists are dead limbs of our people, which causes the entire body to rot. Now he wrote this. He passed on in 1933. Again, the state was created 15 years later in 1948. It was ratified. He lived from 1839 to 1933 in Radom in Poland. And this is what everybody respects his teaching. He said, the Zionists are terrible, like everybody else said, from Russia, from Ukraine, from Hungary. They all stood as one voice. They said, Zionism is a terrible leech on Judaism. It's like a tumor that causes the entire body to rot. What they're doing is trying to transform our religion to a nationalist concept where you're going to take a piece of land, and that's forbidden. First of all, we're not allowed to, and besides which, that it's rooted in saying that God isn't protecting us. We have to have a gun to protect us, a piece of land. So the whole thing is rooted in heresy and blasphemy. But God foresaw this, and He warned us that He gave us 3 oaths. He said, "Don't leave exile. Don't go up en masse to the Holy Land. Do not attempt to rebel against nations. Don't make your own state." And Zionism, in one fell swoop, breaches all these things. They go up in mass because they pick Palestine out of the countries to do it, because they understood that that's where they'll get Christian support, and they rebel against the nations, the people that are living there, and they call themselves the beginning of redemption, because that's how they want to ensnare the religious. So they say, with the beginning of redemption, and they try to play on emotions. We Jews suffered so much, and they say, look, you suffered so much by Hitler, and so, well, they started before Hitler, like 50 years before, but they say, you suffered so much in exile, so now we'll make our own land and we'll save ourselves. And with the beginning of redemption, so they're breaching all the laws of exile. So Zionism is a total a corruption of Judaism. It's a total rebellion against Judaism. And then, like you said, they try to condone and to explain that it's not a breach of what it says, because they know that you can't say that we're not following the Talmud. Because first of all, it's the words of the prophecies of King Solomon. And secondly, the Talmud is part of Judaism. And if they want to get the Jews involved, so they have to explain why they could do it. So they say, oh, the oaths are nullified. They're not active anymore. But that's a farce. And all the rabbis stood up against it. Now, I want you to know that in the Holy Land, the chief rabbis of Palestine themselves, like in 1920s, the Zionists started, like I say, already well before the state. So the chief rabbis over there was Rabbi Sonnenfeld of blessed memory in the Holy Land, and he met with the king of Transjordan, and he pleaded with them. He said, we have no aspirations to have our own national home. We don't want to take over the land. And then so he was at the beginning when Zionism started coming up in groups and so forth. Eventually, he passed on, and he had it's a lifetime job, position. And when he passed on, Rabbi Dushinsky took over. Rabbi Dushinsky was in the time of the beginning of the state of Israel. So he pleaded in 1947, a year before the state was ratified by the United Nations. And in the United Nations documents, here's what it says: we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. This is what it's in the United Nations documents. This was the chief rabbi. Look, we're not talking about some person who's anti-Semite. We're talking about the head of the Jewish community. He said, we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. We don't want this. And this is the narrative of the Jews. When he passed on, you see they're taking up another. You see the tens of thousands of Jews in Jerusalem, and then you can see in the United States, because the very religious communities, when Netanyahu, the prime minister, came to visit, when President Obama, you see them coming up in the tens of thousands in front of the White House, and they're stating that Bibi Netanyahu does not, and the state of Israel does not represent world Jewry. Israel has no right to rule over any part of the Holy Land. Basically, we are standing in opposition to all what Zionism is. In other words, they're not the representation of Judaism. It's a farce. It's a false Judaism.
And out of all these, there's such a weaponization of the accusation of anti-Semitism. There's clearly, it does exist, but people resort to it very quickly. And when you guys are called anti-Semitic, it's the clearest sign that it's got out of hand. This weaponization of that accusation for you guys to be in full regalia. Your whole life is dedicated. You've memorized most of the largest book of all time, and one of the oldest books of all time. You guys, I although I'm a secular man, I have huge respect for the intellectual prowess you guys demonstrate by memorizing these books, and for you to be accused, it shows that word has been it's a political tool now. It's no longer about actual racism. In fact, that's its point. It's to distinguish from racism. It's so that, because if they call you racist, then they have to be racist. They can call you someone anti-Semitic so that they can get away with other forms of discrimination.
Yeah, well, more than that, I just, again, if anybody is not lazy, it's a critical subject. This what's happening in Palestine and Israel and this and that, so, and what the repercussions around the world, the different wars and that's happening, that's coming from this war, from what's happening in Palestine. So person really should consider it important enough to take the time to understand what's happening. And if you will use a little logic, just a little logic, basic common sense, and you will study, you will recognize and see that invariably the very religious communities, if you're living in the United States, you don't have to go further than go Manhattan. Right across from Manhattan. Manhattan is an island. It's connected to Brooklyn with the George Washington Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, and Williamsburg Bridge. Williamsburg Bridge, you cross that Williamsburg Bridge, you can see it from Manhattan. You cross right over it. On the right side is the largest concentration of religious Jews. Now, our Jews, we're talking about a community that, as you said, we are totally loyal to our Torah, that we have every child learns in a private school. We don't have family planning, so we have an average of maybe 6-7 children. Thank God should bless. And they all study in private schools. It costs fortunes, because the United States pays for public school, but they don't pay for the private education. So each child has individually pay thousands. We pay for kosher food because you can't just buy it, in any supermarket when it's on sale. Clothing, we have to pay for our, attire. All of this, in other words, we give our lives for our religion. You will see in that community, the largest concentration of religious Jews, go up and down miles. You won't find one single Israeli flag. Now, if it's critical for Judaism, or it's somehow beneficial for Judaism, to have a state of Israel, or what they could say, our state, our Jewish state, and so forth, this would be the first community that they would be supporting it. Yet this is the community where they won't even wave one single Israeli flag in the community, because we're entirely opposed. Now, this is not only in Williamsburg. You will go to any country, you go to England, we have a nice concentration of religious Jews, and it's the most religious community is called Stamford Hills, and that's in London. And it happens to be that they have a lot of Muslims living there, and they have a mosque and a synagogue and a mosque and a synagogue. Again, you won't find Israeli flags there. And the reason is because, being that they're very religious, they oppose the existence of the state of Israel, not because it's not very religious, because the concept of having a state is totally is a total rebellion against God. It is incongruous. It is antithetical to Judaism. It's contradictory to our religion. So you go there and you go to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the very religious community is Mea She'arim. That's where the Jews moved right after after the creation of the state. So they were moved out of the old city, the communities that were anti-Zionist, and they moved. And where are they living? They're concentrated in Mea She'arim. Again, you won't find Israeli flags. In fact, what you will find is they're constantly demonstrating on the streets in Mea She'arim and other areas, and they get brutally beaten. Children, old men. We never carry guns. Our history is a fact that the religious communities, we don't carry guns or knives, and they stand and demonstrate against the state of Israel, and they get brutally beaten and assassinated. Children, old rabbis. This is it's
Yeah, so
scandalous.
in Israel, there's
In Israel,
anti-Semitism
if
towards the
it's been done for
religious.
76 years. If
Yeah.
this would be in the United States, God forbid, or any other place, what they would be doing this, unabashedly, the Israeli army, if they would do this in any other country, of a people would do this, it would be considered scandalous. They would be yelling anti-Semitism. Yet this is what they're doing to the Jewish people. And they get away with it, and the world does not.
And I heard they're actually drafting they're now in Israel. They're compelling there's a compulsion for the religious Jews who normally boycott the service, the compulsory service. Now some of these Hasidim and Orthodox are forced to actually enlist. Now, one quick digression.
See, I wanted to show you. They get arrested, boys and girls, because they refuse to serve in the army. So they get arrested by them. And you mentioned before you asked that question. Let me just say you call it anti-Semit. They attack us. They attack people who are opposing them as anti-Semitic. They are the textbook definition of anti-Semitism, because they beat and kill, first of all, the Palestinian people and the Jewish people. They're busy 76 years oppressing the Jewish people who are living in the Holy Land, who refuse to accept their rule and their transformation to the nationalism, to their Zionist state of Israel, and they're creating a rift between Jews and Muslims and Jews and people around the world. Millions of people are looking at Jews now because of what's happening in Gaza, and they're looking at us as Nazis. They look at the Jewish people as, God forbid, as inhumane. When who are the ones who are doing this? The Zionists, and you don't even recognize on them that they're Jews. So when they go around, you don't even see they're Jewish. We go around, people see us, and they automatically see we're Jewish.
So you're paying for their exactly.
So we suffer for their evils, for their deeds. We suffer as Jews, God forbid. So
and which is one of the reasons why I want to speak with you. That's one of the most important things. Is I want people to understand that the more religious Jewish people are actually not approving of what's going on. There's people that see stuff on the news, then they see someone in full regalia like you, and they go, "That's him." Whereas every person, every Ashkenazi person has the temptation. You could cut your hair, cut your beard, and become. You could just adapt to society and hide. And you're the one actually having to represent your faith. And another thing that I'm always curious about, you have a button with the flag crossed out. I have heard, correct me if I'm wrong, the Star of David is not culturally in the Jewish religion from the start. Is that true? Is the Star of David an actual religious symbol, or is that a symbol of Zionism that came later?
The Star of David, the actual Star of David, is an old Jewish symbol, but it was never made. It's not a flag. It was something that it's in our Jewish books, like many other issues. It's maybe a Kabbalic symbol or something from Kabbalah, metaphysical or whatever. But it had nothing. In fact, many of our rabbis stopped using it in our synagogues. We used to use that as a symbol on a lot of our things and on the old throughout the generations. But being that Zionism co-opted this, so our communities, the very religious communities, stopped putting them up in our synagogues because the Zionists started using it as their symbol, and it's so demeaning and so repugnant. You have a group of people who make a state that totally flaunts their rebellion against God. Like I say, the cars go there on the Sabbath, they breach all the laws of God, and yet they have the audacity to use like what they call the Star of David, a holy symbol from King David, so that they have the audacity to use our symbols and our Torah to further their rebellion against God and their oppression of the people of Palestine. In our Torah, it says that thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Like I said, we're supposed to show gratitude to the people who did kindness. And the genocide, the the horrific atrocities and everything that's happening, the murder, the oppression of the people of Gaza and of all of Palestine, it's unbelievable. And we are so, our communities, our rabbis, we cry, we hurt with the people of Palestine, and how dare they do this in our name? It's an insult it's an insult to basic common sense when the world, anybody stands up and wants to differentiate between Judaism and Zionism. They say how that you're committing a crime and you're an anti-Semite.
Or self-loathing is the other tool. They call you a self-loathing.
Well, they call us a self-loathing, just fine. But anybody who stands up when you so clearly, if anybody just like say a little logic, a little common sense that Judaism is a religion, Judaism is something that was practiced and that we live together with Muslims. And if you go to any very religious community, the very religious are anti-Zionist, yet that's all ignored. And they have the audacity and the world, the politicians, like totally ignores the very religious Jews who I'm talking about. We just lived through we with the remnants that we survived Hitler. Our communities are almost entirely in Williamsburg and so forth, where with the children of people of Hungary and Poland, people who survived the Holocaust. We're hanging on with our teeth. We're keeping our religion. We gave our lives for it, and we continue to give our lives for our religion. And then to go totally ignore us. And to say and to support this agitator in the world that agitates hate and causes rift and strife amongst nations, say no, these are the ones that and they're to be believed. They're Judaism, and all the Jews who are practicing the religion are bogus. And you have to accept them, and So I mean, it's an insult to basic common sense, and that the ones who are standing up and pleading for the people of Palestine, when you're witnessing children being murdered, you're witnessing reporters being targeted, doctors are arrested and assassinated, hospitals bombed, and every time that happens, it's because Hamas is in the hospital. Hamas is in every hospital. Hamas. I mean, they make like the people are fools. They look at people as idiots, and so it's an insult to humanity. And yet the politicians are playing that game. Not to mind you, many human beings, grassroots, millions are standing up and opposing this. But the politicians, for some reason, we think it's the works of Satan because it defies logic how they're being so successful. It's a satanic movement, and you'll think about it because it defies logic. When the UN ratified the state in 1948, the UN was created just prior to the 1948. It was created for one purpose: that you should be able to adjudicate a conflict in the world through peaceful means. That's why it was created, because millions of people were killed by World War I and World War II. So they made a United Nations. And one of the first things they did was to ratify to create the state of Israel, meaning they call it like a Jewish state. In other words, you're taking an area where the majority were Muslims, majority people living there were Muslims, and the secondary community was Christian, and the third was Jews. Now you're going to call it a Jewish state. That automatically means that you're going to cause fighting and death and bloodshed. Because why are you creating forcefully creating a country that's going to be under the name of one group? That's going to mean that everybody else is second-class citizens automatically. That's what it psychologically, that's what it's going to create hate. And so how could the United Nations, that was created to bring peaceful resolutions to problems, so they gave the name to the place, an area, the state of Israel. Think about it. It defies, and it happens to be that not only the Muslims and the Christians, but the Jewish community that was living there, although they were the minority, the Jewish community also didn't want it, as I pointed out.
Yeah, and one of the other ironic things is that the native population of Palestine in genetic reports have shown to have genetic links to the original Levant people. Their ancestors were forced to, and I have my own criticisms of Islam. I won't make you do that, because I know the mission here is to create peace. But their ancestors were converted to Islam, but they are actually mostly descendants. A lot of them are descendants of the Jewish people. So although they might not be practicing Jews or culturally Jewish, they actually are ironically also ethnically related, right?
Yeah, but it's true. It's a lot. It's true a lot what you're saying. But even if it wouldn't be that, simply let's just. It's the fact is that we were living together for hundreds of
Yeah.
years. We were babysitting each other's children. There were no human rights groups. There was no United Nations. We lived for literally hundreds of years together in the same courtyards, babysitting each other's children. I have people amongst our communities. I mean, I remember there are still people alive because it's only 76 years. They lived in the old city together. We all lived together in peace and harmony with a distinctly different religion. So this was never an impediment to peace. The impediment to peace is the introduction of a movement that wants control over the land, as I say, against the will of the inhabitants. So how did the United Nations ratify this thing is beyond comprehension. It's like I say, satanic, and that culminates in what we're witnessing today in Gaza. That the murder of children, but not it happened once, it happened one day, 2 days, over 400 days. This happened. So we're talking about that everybody's witnessing on their smartphones or on their computers. They're seeing daily, and so that the Zionists give an excuse. Oh, this was because there's a pocket of Hamas pocket. Every time they destroyed all the hospitals, that killed almost 200 reporters. Targeted, they killed the doctors, arrested doctors. How dare they? And the world is silent. It could only because the Shatan, the Satan, is successful because it defies humanity and it's an insult to basic humanity. And yet they refer to anybody who opposes this as being anti-Semitic. Is this anti-Semitic? Or are they the anti-Semites? They are the personification of anti-Semitism, the cause of anti-Semitism, of exacerbating anti-Semitism. They are against my religion. They're trying to co-opt my religion. And yet our voice is stifled, is silenced. Nobody listens to the Jews in Jerusalem who are being beaten and arrested. Nobody listens to the Torah authorities that are living, these distinguished rabbis who are living around the world. It's unbelievable. It's incomprehensible. It's satanic, but we will not be silent. And we plead with the world, do not be intimidated. Speak up. First, we urge everybody to pray to God that he's awesome, the Almighty of the world. He will bring an end, God, with his compassion, just like a tsunami ends a plague. But at the same time, stand up and speak up, because we are required to speak up, especially us as Jews. We feel the obligation. We have to speak up because it is being perpetrated in our name.
Back to religion. So just I first off, I totally appreciate everything you just said, because I am also mortified. I am so mortified about what's going on. I don't want to see children harmed. I don't want to see this violence. And I'm also just as mortified at your people's past. Those two things are both equally bad. And I appreciate that you're mortified by that. Some people might say, well, you're being selectively outraged by this oath in the Talmud. You're saying, oh, we have to obey this part of the Talmud, but then there's other parts of the Talmud and the Torah that are extremely violent. In Numbers, Moses says, oh, why didn't you kill the women and children? Go back and kill the women and children. In Deuteronomy, there's a lot of commands to go harm people in the Torah and the Talmud. And so what do you say about those violent, controversial things in the Torah and the Talmud that you're clearly, which I'm glad that you're not going out and saying that we all need to do those things. Why is it that in those situations you are sort of, they would say, selectively choosing what to follow?
Well, I will let me just say, I had a rabbi who passed away a few years ago. He was of one of our greatest leaders here and fighters against Zionism, and he constantly wrote many books and went out with us to demonstrations. He was hidden in a bunker from the Nazis in Budapest when the Nazis, for like a half a year, the last year, his mother was killed by the Nazis, and on and on. He went and he was a teenager, moved up to the Holy Land. and married a lady who was sixth generation Palestinian. Just giving an idea. With sixth generation, she lived together with the Palestinian Arabs and so forth. They were living in peace. I'll just give you an idea who he was. A great rabbi. His name was Rabbi Beck, Moshe Dov Beck of blessed memory. And so he used to say, let's just step back for a second before we start getting into verses and things, comments of the Talmud of this. He said, let's look at our history. We lived in these countries and we were respected by these leaders, by the Muslim imams, the leaders, the sheikhs, the ayatollahs. They were told, the communities, the Arab and Muslim communities, by these scholars, Muslim scholars who knew our Torah, they studied it, and they still and all had no problem with taking in the Jews. And we flourished amongst them, put out our greatest rabbis. We had our communities in Egypt, in Tunisia, Morocco, in Yemen, in every single Morocco and in Algiers, we flourished. These communities, you can go there. I went to some of these countries and you can go to all of them. You see that the communities flourished till the advent of Zionism. So we lived amongst them. So if it would be true that the Jews have these evil, God forbid, evil commands or something like that, it would have been known. It would have been practiced. On the contrary, you found that the Jewish community, because they're practicing the religion, they were respected and they were a priestly, a nation, a people of holiness and doing good deeds. It's a fact, and we respected each other. We lived amongst each other. So all these things are somehow misrepresented. Now, that said, now I'll get into the details a little. The first thing is that Zionism is a total different issue than Judaism. I said there's day and there's night. There's Judaism and there's Zionism. Never the two shall meet. So we are, they're totally contradictory. Now, Zionism, in order to gain legitimacy, it tries to masquerade. But in the Star of David, they call it Israel, Jacob in the Torah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. His name was Israel, Jacob. And they try to use, and Netanyahu comes to the United Nations or the UN, and he says, "Oh, God said that this and that, that it's our land and this and that." So they wave the Bible as a deed to the land. They totally falsify the Torah in many ways, and they breached the wall of orthodoxy. I started at the beginning that there's like reform, and then they became another movement called conservative Judaism, which is they decided reform went off the deep end, so they became more conservative. But it's all a joke. You can't go away from orthodoxy. But orthodoxy was breached by having people who they try to say in orthodoxy that you have to keep the Torah. Yes, they try to twist and misconstrue the Torah, that it should be acceptable to be a Zionist. Now, they call themselves mostly modern Orthodox. They like to refer to as a euphemism, modern Orthodox, for a compromised Judaism. In other words, you don't have to keep everything. They don't keep the laws on modesty properly. Like I say, and Zionism, it's all parcel of breaching the walls of orthodoxy. We are Orthodox. We do not change the Torah. They are going away from what the true Torah is. So they try to co-opt and take words out of the Torah. Now, so you'll find the law here, law there. I usually am very, very reluctant to get into all our Torah because it's massive. The Torah is, and our instructions are, like I say, to be godly. It says in our Torah, Mahu rachum, afatate rachum. Just as God is compassionate, you must be compassionate. If we teach our children kindness, if God forbid, if we take a child into a store, a candy store, and he'll take a candy off take it, so you will hear the mother, if anybody's observing how it goes, the mother say, "What did you do?" Or if they're making noise, they'll say, "It's a chilul Hashem." Besides the fact that they're stealing and they will pay for even less than a penny's worth. By us, we're not allowed to take up even less than a penny's worth of, we would see, to take the time and effort to go and repay the store if the child went home and they found in his pocket a candy. But at the same time, they will say it's a chilul Hashem. You're desecrating God's name, because we believe we are to be a representative of godliness and our connection with God, which is to be that we should be a picture of holiness. And if we do commit something, being that we are a picture of Judaism that's supposed to represent the covenant with God. So if somebody does something wrong, he's bringing up like a bad picture on God. God forbid. So we call it the desecration, Chilul Hashem, desecration of God's name. So Zionism, unfortunately, takes the Torah and uses it. They take words out of the Talmud, out of here and there, and they try to, like the one that you said, they try to twist and turn that it should be compatible. Comes Netanyahu, this latest one of his things, he said, they're Amalek. That the people of they could use the word Amalek. That the Amalek all of a sudden becomes knowledgeable of the Torah. He has no.
And that
problem.
means that they worship the stars, right? That's an idol worshiping.
It was a nation. Amalek was a nation that when the Jews were taken out of Egypt, everybody had heard about the splitting of the sea, and they respected the Jews, and the Jews were supposed to go into the Holy Land, and anybody who didn't want to was ready not to worship idols could remain there, and the Amalek was the first nation that attacked the Jews when they left Egypt, and they had no reason to attack the Jews. The Jews were not coming into their property; they had nothing with them. So it's brought down that it's an evil nation, whatever. And so
basically, to paraphrase, to what you're saying is, so the violent scriptures in the Torah are specific times in the ancient world when there was a command to fight in a war, but it doesn't compel you to harm people today in your everyday life. It's just an ancient description of war.
Right. It's all the laws and these teachings of the nation of Israel that was in the Holy Land at that time is totally stopped. Since the destruction of the temple, we are forbidden. We have all these laws taking Zionism and conflating it together with the laws of the nation of Israel. On the contrary, Zionism is totally breaching the concept of making it is totally cut off from Judaism. They're not Jews because they're cutting themselves off from Judaism. They have a certain spiritual obligation, if they're coming from Jewish mothers, that they must uphold the Torah. They cannot cut themselves off, but they have literally, to a degree, it's like Hot 1.6. It's a metaphysical thing that they can't release themselves of the obligation of holding the Torah, but we will never accept them into Judaism as a quorum, whatever is required for prayer or something, because they've cut themselves off from Judaism. Judaism does not give us the right to return and make a nation. Judaism does not give us any of the things that they're talking about. Amalek and all these things are a time when there was a sovereignty under the commands of God that is unacceptable, that we are forbidden to have. We are forbidden to have now since 2,000 years. And that's why for 2,000 years, even though we went through many hardships and the crusades and inquisitions, and there were times that there were rich Jewish communities, they never built any Jewish sovereignty anywhere in the world because it's forbidden for us. So this whole Zionism is a total cutoff. It has absolutely nothing to do with Judaism. They're simply stealing words of the Torah to do. And the issues where it talks about Amalek and all these things are, like you say, in the time of the temple. But also, you have to understand it, which is not for us now to get into all the laws, what was then and how it was and what the issues were. But it has absolutely nothing to do with our present day. So that's why we're very reluctant even to get into any conversations of that, because it's totally not for the our Jewish obligation today is to be God-fearing, to keep the Sabbath kosher, to do kindness to people, to show and to show gratefulness to the people who did us kindness in our suffering, and especially the Muslim and Arab countries, the people of Palestine. So everything that Zionism does is turning it on its head, and it's unfortunate because you see settlers. By the way, and a lot of these communities, the settlers, Ben Gvir, Smutrich, these guys that you're hearing about lately, they're from the settlements. So people see them all the time. So they think that and they could call themselves Orthodox. But you're forgetting that the very core religious communities are anti-Zionist. You're seeing a lot of these people because they're on the front. They're always fighting with the absolute, always hearing of the settlers. But these guys are coming from either non-religious background or from what they call modern Orthodox, which is, like I say, a compromised, it's a euphemism for compromised Judaism that's not, even though it's considered, they went over to the Orthodoxy, meaning they keep the Sabbath, but they're not Orthodox. They don't keep the core issue of leaving exile. So it's false. It's all false.
So it's
But
not
people
forbidden
hear a
for
lot about
them to be in Israel. What's forbidden is for everyone to mass immigrate. So that's why, because there might be some confusion as to, like, there were Jewish people there prior to this immigration. So you're not saying it's forbidden for a Jewish person to be there, but
Exactly.
to form the state.
That's very important.
Right.
What you said is a very important issue. It's on the oath of God was that we're not allowed to return en masse in very large numbers. But as individuals, we were never. If God would have forbidden us to live there, then you won't find a religious Jew there for the 100 years. But we were not forbidden by God as individuals to live there. So many rabbis throughout history, they would live off. When they became in their old age, they would take a few students and go up there. Not a lot of rabbis, but they were throughout they trickled in from different countries because they wanted to live what we all believe the Holy Land is holy. And we pray and yearn to return the day when God will reveal his glory and everybody will serve God in harmony. God will build the temple without any human intervention. It will be like a metaphysical concept. So the Muslims have no problem with that because they know that's our belief of end of time, but not that we're going to take guns and go up there. But till that day comes, we believe that the Holy Land is holy. So you will have certain individuals who went up there to live off the life, not for business. Nobody went there for business because it was a poor land. They went to live to study and live off the life and holiness. They would take a few students. So it became eventually, through the hundreds of years, Palestine, the Holy Land, Jerusalem, Al-Quds, these Safed, Tiberia, Maron, these places became a center of like the Ivy League of Judaism. They would have these great scholars. It was a collection of scholars, holy men, and these people were so God-fearing, and they lived together with the Muslim and Arab people. So it happens to be, ironically, that the Holy Land the community was the most God-fearing around the world. We respected them. We would send money. That they lived from charity from around the world. That's how they lived, because they would be studying all day the Torah they would studying, and these people lived together, of course, with the Arab and Muslim neighbors. Then the Zionists came later in the 1890s, 1880, 1890s. They started in 1900 and 1910, and they started agitating. They started taking over the land. So these were not of the Jewish community that was living there for hundreds of years. That's why it's so ironic. So that's why I mentioned earlier the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jewish communities who were living there, the indigenous people, the citizens, they were the ones who opposed the creation of the state. Yet,
and what you're describing is so beautiful, like everyone getting together, everyone living together. And for me, although I don't follow the scripture, it's so consistent what you're describing, because we all see you guys are the first cosmopolitan community. You guys were in every country before modern day where everyone could fly. You guys had and sometimes for bad reasons, you guys were forced to, but you guys were around the world already. You had developed this big cosmopolitan network, maintaining similar culture. And for us, the non-Jewish people, we see that, okay, you guys are in Spain, you guys are in Greece, you guys are everywhere. It's contradictory for you to have your own state and say, hey, everybody out. And so everyone makes these memes and comments about how contradictory that is to they want diversity in every other country, but then you ironically don't want diversity in the land of Israel. They want everything to be, and so it's very nice this idea that we can all get along, despite you guys wanting to preserve your culture. You want your culture to be pure. You have no issue with Muslims or Christians, and I am a secular man, and we are getting along right now. And that's another thing, is just as you want to just make a distinction from the Zionist Jewish people, I want to make a distinction between the secular people that are claiming to be atheists, because to me, this Zionist atheism is a religion in itself, because they're basically selectively reading the parts of the Torah that say, you're the chosen people, you come from this land. They're taking a few paragraphs, getting rid of everything else, and using that. So they call themselves atheists. We have celebrity atheists like Sam Harris, who are Zionists, and they're almost religious about it. And they claim to be these these very rational, atheist, scientific-based people. But when it comes to this topic, they revert to I don't want to call them religious, but they have stripped away everything else that's inconvenient to this narrative. And so,
yeah, you can see when they made the PLO, you can see the Palestinian authorities, Yasser Arafat. We had a rabbi who was from the Jewish community there, and he was a representative in there. And so what did the Zionists do? They poured acid in his face. He was blind in one eye and was barely able to see from the other. He lived in the city of Jerusalem. When they made the Hamas, we went to Gaza, and here you see Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed by the Zionists, and he stood together with us. He said, "I'm not against Jews." He said, and he just. Everyone, the narrative of the people, this is ignored. People don't report what he said. That he said, "I just want to live together with Jews in peace," and everybody vilifies. They were the government that the governing entity in Gaza, and they want, all they said is, "We want our freedom." As Jews, we stand together with them. We want the Palestinian freedom. We don't want this ersatz Judaism to control the occupation of another people. It's not our religion. Our religion is 3,000. Our religion is 3,000 years. 3,000 years. It hasn't changed. Zionism is a political movement of 140 years around, not more. The state is 76 years. How do they get the authority to speak in our name? How do they get the authority to speak in the name of Judaism? And how do they get the authority that they therefore can kill other people, and that they can be condoned for it, and that if you speak up against them, you're anti-Semitic? It's beyond comprehension. It's not logical, and it's false, and
in today's world,
catastrophic. I just wanted to show you, this is the book. They finally brought it to me, so you should have. It's Traditional Torah Opposition to Zionism.
Okay.
Historical documents. We have many historical documents here. What I showed you before from Chaim Weizmann, and maybe just that I'll quote one other quote, because it's really just to get an idea of the false, the falseness of Zionism here. So I'm opening. This is Theodor Herzl, the founder of the state of Zionism. Yeah, and he writes in his diary in page 14. He writes, "The way to solve the problem of anti-Semitism is to speak to the head priest of Vienna, to get an appointment with the Pope, to make a mass conversion of all the Jews of Austria to Catholicism." That would be the solution, to make everybody converted to Catholicism. It should be done on a Sunday in the middle of the day with music and pride publicly. We are the last generation that held on to the faith of our forefathers. The conversion will be in St. Stephen's Cathedral. Imagine, here we died. We were proud to die for our religion. We were burnt at the stake. We were burnt, tortured and burnt, and we never gave up our religion. That's our soul is our basics, and the body is to nurture the soul, or so forth, however you get into the metaphysical of life. And we teach our children to say every day that we're ready to give our lives to Shema Yisrael, hear, O God, God is our God, God is one. This is our life. And we died for that. And people had the opportunity, even by World War II, to go to monasteries or whatever, to take the children and leave them there. And they said rather they'll die as Jews than God forbid they should grow up as non-Jews. And we were proud of that. This is what and he's coming along, this hero, the father of Zionism. He said they should make with music and publicly, and music and pride. It should be done in the middle of it with music and pride publicly, a conversion of all the Jews to Catholicism. This is the father of Zionism. Jabotinsky, Vladimir Jabotinsky, the founder of revisionist Zionism, he was also one of the fathers of Zionism. He was the mentor of Begin, one of the prime ministers in Israel, if you heard of it. And he said, and this is in 1919, way before the state was created, but the beginning of in the Haaretz magazine newspaper, that newspaper was probably heard of, and that's from way back. It was in a Palestinian so-called Jewish newspaper, and he proudly wrote in the paper an article. He said, "The national home, we will announce that those Jews who have on themselves the rust of exile and they refuse to shave off their beards and earlocks, payas, will be second-class citizens and not have the right to vote." These are what this is what Zionism is. Remember. So when they come along and they decry you of that, and they accuse you of being anti-Semitic, say, who is the textbook definition of anti-Semitism if not Zionism and the state of Israel? They are our worst enemies. They have caused they spill blood and cause the blood of Muslims, Arab, Palestinians, Jews to be spilled. They've created a rift between Jews and Muslims around the world, and the world, it's satanic what's happening. But one day, because we believe with God's help, with His compassion, it will end entirely. And it says in the Torah, "Why are you rebelling against me? It will not be successful." The Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, these things had an end. It looked like it was etched. We looked at even the apartheid. Apartheid. Today, any child will tell you that it's who's old enough to have a little logic. He'll say, "What do you mean? A black person becomes a second-class citizen? What's going on here? How could that be?" Nobody will comprehend that. And if you go to the United Nations and you will say, "I want to make a state that's built on apartheid," they'll laugh you out of the United Nations, obviously. Nobody will accept that. Yet South Africa had apartheid, and it existed for tens of years, and they were respected. Their ambassador was His Excellency. This guy is excellent. Everybody was given respect. And the ones who stood up in opposition were terrorists. The ones who stood up in opposition, Nelson Mandela was 27 years in prison. 27 years. And it only took because obviously it was God, the one who brought an end to it, but it was the push in the physical world. It came about that it was the grassroots. It was the people on the streets who were stubborn and they were like mosquitoes. They kept on going around and pestering their politicians till the politicians were uncomfortable. They had no choice but to stop supporting the apartheid in the South Africa, and it stopped. So it was the grassroots. It wasn't that the good people, the politicians, the leaders of the country that stopped it. The United Nations, the great United Nations, brought an end to apartheid. No, it was the good people, the grassroots. And that's what we have to do. We have to continue doing. And even though you could say, "What do you mean? It's in the United Nations and it's all the leaders, the presidents." God, we have to beg our leaders. We have to pray to God that He should put in their hearts to do what's right, and we have to plead with our leaders. As a Jew knows, one of our obligations is to be a loyal citizen in every country we reside. So we approach our leadership, our president, and this. And now today we're getting a new president, as we know, we're getting a new president, and God should put in his heart to do what's right, and he should turn around. Because he does. They say he's a very practical person, and he looks what's practical and what's going to bring good. And he should not get intimidated. He should turn around and bring an end to this. Even though everybody says it's against what he says, but I don't care. It doesn't matter. God could put in. He should bring an end of this occupation in its entirety. It should be a free Palestine, and God will help. It will be that day one day. A free.
Although
Palestine.
He does have powerful people, they do have their influence, but I'm not necessarily subscribing to any political party, but I do have that same hope that something good happens. And I just want to end this with something positive. We're talking about a lot of historical things, a lot of things that would be seen as negative, just as a positive affirmation. What we're doing here is we're not supporting terrorism. We're not deniers. We're not self-loathing. We're not anti-Semitic here. We want people to get along. We are condemning things that we're condemning violence, but although Rabbi and I are extremely different, we can have a pleasant conversation. We could be speaking to a strict rabbi, a Christian, everyone in this situation, in this modern crusade, can get along. And so I thank you so much, Rabbi, for speaking with me. I hope we can speak again. We are in New York, so maybe next time I can meet you in person. And thank you so much for teaching me about all of this. And if there's any last words you have, please go ahead.
Yeah, I hope that it should be a catalyst. God should help that it should go out to the world and people should come to their senses, and again bring an immediate end of this unacceptable occupation of the people of Palestine, of free Palestine. And then we can live together again as the beautiful fabric of the Holy Land was. That we can live together in peace and harmony and serve God. And like just after people were afraid the end of apartheid, there will be murder, mass murder in the street. It wasn't. This God will help that we can again serve God in joy. And I wish the message goes out to the people of Palestine that we as Jews, we are hurting and crying and feeling their suffering, and the people of Gaza, and they should know that we have their back, so to say. When they're out there, we go out in the freezing cold and the heat, and for over a year, we went through all the seasons tirelessly from our communities. It doesn't get covered usually, but we go out there and we demonstrate and we speak up and we won't be silent. And the true people who are loyal to the faith of Judaism, we do not accept the occupation in any shape or form. And God will help. And we are urging other people also. Everybody should pray to God that He should, with compassion, bring an end to this. At the same time, do not be intimidated. It's not anti-Semitic. Speak up. And you can always point to the Jewish community and say, see, these guys are obviously very religious Jews, and they're opposing the occupation and Zionism. They're not anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic. On the contrary, it's saving lives. It's godly. It's what people call humane human rights. It's we call godliness. You must speak up for the people of Gaza. Yes, they've introduced a peace now, a ceasefire now, or something. But it's a pittance. It's only the beginning. They need everything. They need back a build up and a free Palestine. Let's not take it apart. And they need a total free Palestine, and we can live together in peace. So we urge everybody to do for them, and God will help that we will be able to celebrate the free Palestine soon in our lives.
I wish you safety and happiness. I treasure this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless. Appreciate it.